I'll try to be what you want me to be every once in a while. I'll try to scream if you want me to scream every once in a while. If I try to stand, I'll blow away with the wind. In the end, only then, or every once in a while.
I've been stuck in here a long time, at least as long as it's taken me to revisit my favorite novel. This behemoth between bindings is called House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. Two of my beloved relatives sent me this book of bewilderment when I was still a teenager, encouraging me to explore it enthusiastically as they knew of my love affair with absurd and surreal works of fiction. It took me a while to crack it open and even longer to eventually finish reading it. I was immediately taken aback by the book's strange structure and occasional labyrinthian page layout, but it was really only novelty at first. I would display it for my friends with an ignorant kind of descriptor like, "Look at these pages, isn't it so odd and different?" Perhaps I had assumed that any substance would simply be overshadowed by the avant-garde presentation. I had assumed that I knew all that was worth knowing about the text because I had glimpsed a few of its fancy tricks. I was wrong. I knew after around 100 pages or so that I was reading a one-of-a-kind masterpiece that would stick with me for years, potentially forever. We follow Johnny Truant, a young tattoo apprentice with little direction in life, after he discovers an unfinished manuscript written by the now deceased Zampano. Zampano had been writing an academic examination of a supposedly much discussed documentary, The Navidson Record. Johnny takes the manuscript home in an attempt to put it all together and hopefully understand it. The only problem is, the Navidson Record doesn't exist. The Navidson Record is actually where a bulk of the story lies. Will Navidson is an award-winning photographer who is now seeking a quiet life with his family after years of excitement, adrenaline, and danger. He decides to document their transition into rural bliss, setting up cameras all throughout the house to try to capture some truth in the peace and quiet. It is soon discovered, however, after returning to the house from some vacation, that a new door has appeared, leading to a small room that wasn't there before, and now the house is not the same size on the inside as it is on the out. House of Leaves could be described as an experimental horror novel told from three separate and distinct perspectives. The different points of view are pinned in their own fonts as sort of additions and footnotes on top of one another. We are reading Zampano's manuscript, interpreted with very colorful commentary by Johnny Truant, along with additions from the unnamed editors, directing you to place the story into a real-world context. Reading House of Leaves can be an exercise in narrative whiplash, constantly throwing you into and then pulling you back out of the story, often in the middle of a thought or statement. This calls attention to the reader and makes them feel like an active participant in the story. The text will fold, take shape, bend, and break, requiring you to sometimes rotate the whole book as you read. You are occasionally called to view the appendix or exhibits in the back of the book, adding yet another action that you take in addition to simply reading. Most books might prefer that you stop thinking about the act of reading and instead simply let you flow through the story with little resistance. House of Leaves
emphasizes your physical engagement with the book. The frequent flipping of pages, taking notes, translating, decoding, and unraveling leaves it up to the reader to solve its mystery, mirroring Johnny's own quest for answers and antithetically immersing you further in the narrative.
I've read this book, as of now, 4 times. Each time, despite my thinking I know what I'm getting into, I find myself getting transfixed by much of the contents in these pages. On my second reading, a few years out from my first, I was working a technical support job from home and was doing a lot of reading in my spare time. And I found a lot of spare time. This job had me sitting at a desk for 10 hours a day, locked in what could only be described as a closet or a tool shed, because that's where my router was. Friends would often react to my office as a prison. Words such as isolated and depressing were often used. I was made to keep the door locked and had not done much in the way of decorating. An old desk, a TV tray, an office chair. The whole space was lightly littered with dust and the corners were crawling with cobwebs. When I got off the clock, I had no interest in stepping foot in there to tidy up. So it remained a tainted temporary jail cell from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. I always spent a lot more energy trying to find ways to avoid working than it probably would have taken me to just do my job. Maximizing hold time, minimizing call time, frequently fiddling with the Ethernet cable to try to trigger an internet outage. The time that I did actually spend working, I was always searching for passive pursuits to pass the time. Fidget toys, simple video games, and if I could afford the attention, books. Lots and lots of books. At the time, I had planned on reading a book that I had read before so that I could shift my focus easily and it wouldn't require my full attention. I had to take several days off of work, however, because I couldn't stop thinking about House of Leaves. I would start the day and stare at the book on my desk until I was driven to open it. And once I did, I found that I couldn't focus on the call that I was working on anymore, and I would have to call out sick. I did this for about a week before my manager told me I had to stop calling out. You direct the pace of this story in a sense, and although I do recommend that you take your time, it will probably take up residence in your mind and consume much of your waking thoughts as you're reading it. Even after you finish reading it, you might find that you can't quite get it out of your head, that you have to make somebody else read it. Spread the virus a little further, just to be able to discuss it with someone else. Maybe they'll be able to offer you some more answers. House of Leaves indulges in selling itself as a sort of found footage narrative, although through text. This is normally referred to in literature as epistolary, but this is maybe even a step further than that. Without ever stating its own legitimacy, the book seeps into your interpretation of reality. You know it isn't real, but there is that doubt. The unreliability of our narrators somewhat makes us doubt our own subjective reality. You might say, just because Will Navidson isn't real, that doesn't mean that Zampano isn't real. If Zampano isn't real, that doesn't necessarily mean that Johnny isn't real. The editors surely aren't fictitious, are they? The truth, of course, is that the story is entirely fictitious, but it spends an enormous amount of energy to make you doubt that fact. If everything is in question, is anything real? Is anything true? If it's possible that nothing is real, then maybe it's also possible that it all is. Where does House of Leaves end and my own life begin? Damn. I wish I had written this book. I've been trying to write a novel for years. All I've ever wanted was to be seen as a writer, I love the art of stringing words together. People have so much power in the words we wield. You can say the same thing 100 different ways, and I love the idea that any problem can, in theory, be solved with the right combination of words in the right order. We use language as a vehicle to move the contents of our heads into the heads of others. However, language is limited. Real life is not so easily described with words alone. Describing the details of an event is one thing, but subjective experience is more complex than a simple listing of things that happened. Art is then maybe a problem of translating that subjective emotional experience into comprehension. House of Leaves excels in revealing this truth. We get to know very little about Zampano, but his character comes through in his manuscript, along with the few hints we do have about who he was. Both Zampano and Johnny have strong voices in the text that reveal their characters to us. If you gave me quotes from both Johnny and Zampano without their respective fonts, I 100% would still be able to tell the difference. House of Leaves is not the first book to play with these themes and concepts, but it does take them to their extremes. I've read other epistolary stories. I've read other stories critiquing the subjectivity in narrative. I've read many stories with unreliable narrators. But House of Leaves is more than just the sum of its parts. It's almost absurd in the combination of so many elements that feel contradictory to the nature of narrative storytelling. It is a book that is wholly unconcerned with being approachable, and that can make it difficult for some people to really get into. However, if you're anything like me and revel in abstruse and absurd art, this book was written for you. Trust me. I mentioned earlier that our narrators are unreliable. Allow me now to elaborate on this alleged unreliability. Our primary narrator, with whom we receive most of our context for the story, is Johnny Truant. Will Navidson, as the story implies, is probably a creation of Zampano. Johnny finds out early on that Zampano was blind, calling into question much of what he writes, and it has to do with photography and a documentary which he could not have seen, even if it did exist. On top of all of this, Johnny Truant is a goddamn liar. This is established very early on in the book as Johnny is egged on to tell a woman in a bar the story of how he broke his front tooth. The story he ends up telling is entirely made up, and his friend is aware of this. He's even giving him little breadcrumbs to follow while he invents this imaginary narrative. The implication being that he does this often. He's skilled not only in creating convincing narratives, but also selling these narratives as truth, as his own experience and backstory. What reason do we have to believe what he tells us? He seems very keen on protecting his traumatic past from people he interacts with. Why would he freely give it to us? In fact, much of his past is learned only through the appendix and exhibits in the back of the book, and we're guided there by the omnipotent editors. Johnny also admits once to making a few tiny adjustments to Zampano's words for dramatic effect, or just to screw with us. This is only done once in the beginning of the book, but it certainly sets the tone for the rest. We can't even trust that Zampano's words are belonging strictly to Zampano. Is any of Zampano real? Maybe Zampano is a character that Johnny creates. Maybe Navidson is too. Zampano is said to have died alone in the dark, the windows boarded up, the doors storm-proofed, the air vents covered up with tape. Johnny mentions that this was not a fear of the outside world because Zampano went outside daily. This was an attempt to keep something in, something ethereal, something that could maybe leave claw marks on the wood floor. Does all of this mean something, or is Johnny just trying to make the story more interesting? Alternatively, Zampano could have invented Johnny. We learn that Zampano was an odd guy. He would have women come to his apartment to read to him and help him write his manuscript. Johnny meets with some of these women to try to find answers. And there are many mysteries surrounding Zampano, but he definitely writes with a purpose. Zampano has a vision, a point to all of this that is hidden from us, and more importantly, from Johnny. Maybe Zampano is more in control of the narrative than we are led to believe. Maybe Johnny is an audience surrogate created by Zampano to fulfill his true goal of finishing his magnum opus. Whose narrative is this? It could be seen as several equally real perspectives or seen as one single omnipotent one. Is it important which is true? It is fiction after all. Do we demand some level of truth in our fictions? Does it need to be anything other than interesting? I'm generally pretty transparent when it comes to how I present my personal anecdotes, both in these discussions and in my personal life. But even I find that my stories slowly become warped the more that I tell them. It's as though I'm workshopping the stories as they're being told. Small changes are made for dramatic effect. I'll gradually change the presentation of certain aspects until it feels true to the way that I remember it happening. But I always question the legitimacy of my own life and experience. I worry that I'm lying to you, even if I believe myself to be honest. We shape our own narrative, intentionally or otherwise. If you were to witness my life objectively, it'd probably be pretty boring. Perhaps my job as an artist is to narrativize my life, stretch it until it's dramatic, comedic, horrific, or at the very least, interesting. If it isn't true, then I'm a fraud. If it isn't interesting, then who cares? I'm occasionally introduced to works that take me beyond simple enjoyment, beyond respect, beyond even inspiration. Instead, these works inflict envy. The overwhelming and exhausting thought with such pieces comes to me as disappointment in the fact that I didn't create it first. A work that speaks so specifically to me, to my interests, to my experience, that it feels like an idea that I could have had, or at least an idea that I wish I had. This mainly occurs to me in music, my primary medium of choice. However, the more music that I create, the more I sort of move past that feeling and become invested in furthering my own unique artistic voice. I suppose it stings worse with House of Leaves because I can't finish a novel. I try, but worry that it becomes too similar to House of Leaves. If I did write a novel, I would just want it to be House of Leaves. I don't want to create a ripoff. Maybe it's okay to make something very similar, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have all the answers. I hardly have any. All I know is that House of Leaves is a book that I wish I had written first. Not that I ever could have. I have a theory about this book, so hear me out. House of Leaves can be viewed as a narrative about narratives, sure, but more accurately, I see it as a narrative about creating narratives and becoming too invested in them. House of Leaves tells a story about artists who create art about other artists and who seek to understand those artists' authorial intent. In other words, House of Leaves is about the horror of being an artist. Will Navidson represents the accomplished artist. He is a photographer who has always stayed true to his work. He's driven by a passion for his work and is uncompromising in his vision. He is, in turn, rewarded for this, both critically and financially, by his peers. He is a success in every aspect of his identity as an artist. His main flaws come from his personal life. He struggles to let go of his career. He has a complicated history with his brother, and he's trying to rekindle his relationship with his wife and kids. His primary conflict in the story is in regards to his new house and the discoveries that it brings with it. He believes it to be an issue worth personally pursuing, much to the dismay of his wife, who reminds him that they moved there to get away from work and focus on their family. He originally does attempt to pass the baton on to other explorers, considering this mystery to be one that requires explanation, even if it should be done by others. But he eventually grows angry by the idea of someone else being credited for work that he should be leading. It is his home, after all, and may be the most important work of his career. But his life, his family, is standing in his way. What is Navidson willing to sacrifice for the sake of his work? Does it make him a better artist if he makes those sacrifices? Zampano might think that Navidson is one of the greats because he is driven above all else by his obsession with his work. Zampano displays a great reverence for Navidson as an artist, fictional or otherwise. If Navidson is a real person, according to Zampano, then he is an artist deserving of the utmost respect. If Navidson is a product of Zampano's story, then he perhaps represents what Zampano wishes he was. Zampano is not accomplished. He is, in this story, the symbol of a failed artist. He never finished his life's work. He isolated himself from the world in an attempt to contain his creation, but is ultimately only ever seen by the world as a sad, old, helpless man who died alone in a cheap apartment, the way that many struggling artists may end up. Johnny sees something more in Zampano. He reads his work and becomes obsessed with it. He seeks to better understand him and is notably affected by the fact that no one sees in Zampano what he does. He writes not just to understand, but to help others understand. I see Johnny as someone who loves a work of art so much that he must share it, and is conflicted on how best to compile and present the work of someone he believes to be more than the world labeled them. Johnny is maybe so impacted by the end of Zampano's journey because he sees himself in him and fears ending up that way. He must wake people up and make them understand. Maybe he must become Zampano to finish what he started. Johnny is the most interesting to me. I very much relate to his struggle in attempting to explain what he finds fascinating in Zampano's work. I've spent so many sleepless nights trying to put into words the way that my favorite art makes me feel. I have, in the past, become unhealthy in my obsession with certain works and isolated in that obsession. Johnny Truant, in my eyes, represents potential. He has a passion and he has skill, but he lacks direction. Johnny is, in the words of the late great Daniel Johnston, an artist in search of a medium. He's a tattoo apprentice, maybe once believing that that would bring him some solace. He now finds himself burnt out from it. This road he walks with the deceased Zampano almost gives his life purpose where that didn't exist anymore. It could put him on a path to discovering a love for writing and a passion for life again. Or it could end up destroying him, as it does so many others. He might not always make it clear, but I feel like Johnny respects Zampano's work and doesn't exactly understand why. I guess that would make this story one of discovery, one of passion, and certainly one of an artist in search of meaning. All I've ever wanted was to be a successful artist. Success can mean so many different things to so many different people, and I'm not exactly sure what it means to me yet. As long as I can remember, I've made stuff. It's about the only thing I've ever been good at. I guess I'm scared that if I'm not seen as an artist, if my work is never respected or appreciated, then my life would have been wasted. I know that isn't true, but my identity is predicated by praise. I am an artist. Without it, I don't really have anything left. If I'm not good at this, then I'm no good at all. It can be easy to see financial success as the quintessential object of success. Even though I know that isn't true, it is still discouraging to be broke and underappreciated after all these years. Having said all this, I'm never gonna stop creating art, even if it kills me. I am Navidson. I am Zampano. I am truant.
As far as I can tell, where am I? Have I arrived in hell? I have to leave, it's killing me. I can't see, I can't breathe.
Hey!
Hello? Hello? Can you tell me where we are? Is there any way out? Are any other people around?
No. There used to be others here, but they're gone.
Where is here? And what happened to the others?
You need to go back. Back to your shed. It's your only chance.
What? How did you know?